Welcome to the KC Ingram Show Meet Your Candidate series. No spin, no agenda, no endorsements, just the candidate. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the many listeners who submitted questions for today's interview. Several of those questions have been incorporated into this discussion. As always, questions are not shared with the candidates in advance. If you enjoy these interviews and want to stay informed on local issues and elections, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and follow the KC Ingram Show on Facebook. I'm KC Ingram. Let's get into it. Today, we're joined by Will Laughlin, candidate for Stuart City Commission Group 1, currently held by Commissioner Campbell Rich. Welcome back to the show, Will.
Thanks for having me again, Casey.
I had you on right after you first announced, and I know you were just getting your feet on the ground again and out there talking with folks. So we wanted to circle back and give you one more opportunity now that you've been out on the campaign trail here for a few months and out there knocking doors. So it'll be some of the questions will be similar, but then we have some new ones for you as well.
Well, I appreciate this opportunity. Thanks.
My pleasure, of course. And for those who may not know you, let's tell voters who you are outside of politics and what you do professionally, how long you've lived in Stuart, and why you are running for city commission.
Okay, what I do outside of running for office is generally I just play some softball. Really have gotten past the age of my prime, so I'm in the twilight years, and I was just playing last night a doubleheader. I'm like, man, I'm getting too old for these doubleheaders, but then try to go fishing when I can, when the weather permits. I'm kind of a fair weather fisherman these days. I used to go out and whatever the seas were, but that's when the fishing was really good. Now I'm like, well, I think I'll just go out when it's good conditions. And I've been here for 33 years, and what I do professionally outside of it is I just creep around following the markets, go down rabbit holes and try to find investments for people that might be worth having. So that's kind of what I do.
And why are you running for city commission?
It's funny. One of the people, well, there's multiple reasons really, but I see a real need. There's a crisis that's underway. Like I said a moment ago, I go down rabbit holes and then I follow the markets, and there's a big issue. I think it was in that a week here forum where Jackie Lippisch had made some comments about these evil forces that kind of ran her off of the South Florida Water Management District. And so I'm very familiar with those evil forces, and I know what their intentions are. So, and I had a neighbor come up to my door several months ago and knocked on it, and she's like, Will, you know what's going on here? I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, yes. And so she was all up in arms, and she just made a comment last night on my Facebook page. She thinks I turned my back on our community because at the time I tried to tell her, hey, this is what's happening and why. And she looked at me like I've seen so many times before. That sounds crazy. Well, no, it's not. And it's underway. And you see it now with the state level, all those bills that have been passed, which allows them to reach out with their claw and take whatever they want. Well, so it was kind of coincidental late last night, early this morning when I saw that and thinking, well, I haven't turned my back on my community. I'm trying to I've actually spoke in front of people. The CSC had a meeting several months ago. I spoke on behalf of our community and people that are at risk here, trying to keep them from raising the millage rate. And they didn't. To their credit, they listened to the people and they didn't raise the millage rate. And I'm back here fighting, to get a spot in City Hall because I know my opponent wants to raise the millage rate. We just had, last week we had a discussion and he was talking about that. Well, every little bit counts when people are on fixed incomes. And I get it. The bigger picture is, welcome to 2030. You own nothing. And that's underway. It's happening. And people are starting to get really nervous and feel squeezed. And they are squeezed. And when that happens, when people get desperate times leads to really desperate measures, but really unfortunate situations. And I thought, well, rather than sit back in my little rabbit hole and I'm going to come out from behind the keyboard, try to do something about it.
And Will, I want to back up too. You mentioned Jackie Lippisch. Everybody, I think, pretty much knows her. She has been just the person on the lead of exposing the detrimental impacts of the Lake Okeechobee discharges to the estuary. All those aerial views folks see, they're from Jackie and her husband, and they're playing on their own time and dime. But you had mentioned, and I want to say a little bit more about that. Jackie was on the South Florida Water Management District Board. She spoke out against the Live Local Act that was passed that took away so much home rule. It's one of the first bills that really have started impacting us locally. And for that, she was removed from the South Florida Water Management District Board. The Senate president would not reconfirm her nomination on that. Wouldn't even bring it up. So those are the forces that are out there that we're up against, and they're very powerful. We're supposed to have free speech here, and she's a representative of us, and she was silenced because of her opinion that many of us agree with on that Lip Local Act. So, and then for folks, real quick, the We Care Martin forums, those were questions that were from you, the residents, and they were unscripted questions. I was the moderator on both of those forums, and I just made sure those questions weren't personal attacks, that they were relevant to the campaign office. So you can watch those forums on my YouTube channel. Just search up the KC Ingram Show. I also linked to it on my Facebook page. So I wanted to shout that out, Will, because those were both really great forums to get to know the candidates really well. From questions nobody knew, we're not scripted. They didn't know what they were going to be. So, all right, back to Will Laughlin. So you ran for the seat in 2022. What did that experience teach you that makes you a stronger candidate today?
Well, at that time, I was hanging around at the satellite level, and I didn't know a lot about the details of the city. Since that time, I know a lot more about the city, taken a lot more time to look at it, get involved. I wasn't on any boards, city boards at the time. I'm now a member of the CRB. So I feel like I have a much better handle. And so when people ask me questions, I have generally a pretty good answer or a pretty good knowledge of whatever they're talking about. And there's so much more to learn. Don't get me wrong. It's just a massive learning curve. But I think from where I was 4 years ago to where I am today, I feel much more comfortable, much more knowledgeable. At that time, 4 years ago, I was kind of also on the fence of like, I don't want to be a politician. I still don't want to be a politician. But I see that those forces that we've been talking about are real, and they're coming. And I've heard people say, well, if we kind of go back to being quiet, the state will just go away. They're not going to go away this time, because over the 30 plus years that I've been watching, these forces, typically when they get noticed, they go into the shadows. But starting about 2020, they're not going into the shadows. They're on the offensive. They're on the hunt. And people seem to think, like when I was talking to a few people about the ball fields, this is a group of realtors, and they thought, well, that'll never happen. The ball fields will never be converted into apartments. We'll never let that happen. They haven't read those laws, and I believe that is a target. And the way they're currently zoned, urban general, they most definitely can get those ball fields. And as I was looking up the zoning maps and stuff, I'm like, I'm on the right path here. This is another reason why I ran. So
I'm shocked those realtors said that. They must have short-term memories or haven't been here that long, because in 2018, 2019, that almost happened. It was extremely close. And it was only because the community rose up and said, no, you cannot sell those ball fields to a developer. And it was exactly for that. So I'm shocked they don't remember how close that was to happening already. And it just takes 3 votes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they knew it, but they think that the people will rise up again and defend it. And they've had other people who weren't in separate conversations say the same thing. Oh, that'll never happen. Well, it can and it will if you have those 3 commissioners. And
people do rise up, look at the data centers, but it still doesn't matter sometimes. So it just takes 3 people. I mean, people have to realize that you get 3 people that are going to vote the way they vote. Now, Will, just real brief, what's the CRB board for folks that aren't familiar?
Okay, CRB is a community redevelopment board. So that's just a place where typically we hear different projects that are kind of in the pipeline. Some of them come up to us and they are requesting funds that are available through the CRA, or the Community Redevelopment Agency. And so we either approve or disapprove or recommend. We usually make recommendations, and then they get passed along up to the regular city commission, and ultimately they make the final decisions typically.
Okay. So what's changed in Stuart over the last 4 years that convinced you now is the right time to run again?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I was dead set against running. But then as I started looking a little closer and, the old dots started connecting, I think the 2 things about the affordable housing issues, and I was at an affordable housing meeting about 4 years ago, and nobody there seemed to know why there was an affordable housing issue. They're all trying to react to the problem. Okay, it's like a problem was created. Now the people are reacting, and they're being driven in the direction of those who created the problem. It's only going to further their narrative. And now here we see it. They passed these laws that allow them to take our control away with Senate Bill 102 and the Live Local Act, and then now most recently Senate Bill 180. So you have that issue, the affordable housing issue, and then the dots were connecting and all falling in place. With the ball fields, the Sailfish Park in particular, okay, the ball fields at Sailfish Park. And being that it's right near the train station and the transit-oriented development, and it's written into the laws, if you're near a transit-oriented development, you can be developed. All they really have to say is you get 3 commissioners that say these are underutilized, or they can say pretty much anything. A developer can come to them and say, oh, look, this is zoned urban general. You can get more revenue from us if you allow us to build. And then if you get the right people that have a track record of approving projects that they didn't need to, especially when they're involving billion-dollar companies, then, goodbye ball fields.
It's as quick as it can happen. And the other thing with transit-oriented development, which would be like the train station, it removes a lot of the parking requirements that normally would apply because they're encouraging folks to the trains. I think people need to realize that. Well, looking back, is there one issue you wish the current commission had handled differently?
Well, I don't like to really judge people, be the armchair quarterback, especially these people are trying to do the best. I know, even my own opponent and everybody's trying to do the best they can. From where they sit. But if there's one thing, I think it would probably be just how and I say this because of all the people I'm hearing as I go knocking on doors and stuff. One of the things that people complain about, they have a beef about, would be the way the former city manager, Mike Martell, was basically shown the door. So I think maybe if that was handled a little bit differently, then possibly a lot of residents would have a lot of questions answered, and they wouldn't be worked up and so emotional right now. Because I think a lot of people are working on emotions, and if you are in a certain alignment, or if you are any way connected to people who they believe mistreated the former manager, good luck. So that would be the one thing.
Okay. If elected, what would be your top priority during your first year in office?
Well, I think the top priority would be, I don't know, I would ideally like to push back against those like the Live Local Act and Senate Bill 180, because that to me is the greatest threat. Now, how much control we have over that as a city, we're already involved with a lawsuit with about roughly 20 other municipalities. And maybe that will be successful. But I'm not really a part of that. That's already underway. So what I could be a part of is how we handle the budget. Right now, I know my opponent, Campbell Rich, would like to see the millage rate brought back up to 5. And, there's concern that we're going to be underfunded. But I just was looking at the budget again this morning. And it's a preliminary snapshot. I think that's what they called it. But the CRA is this giant elephant, that keeps the $10 million elephant that's starting to feed on everything or take away the lunch of the people outside the CRA. And we mentioned this before. We've talked about this before, but I think this really needs to be addressed. Either you have 2 options. You either restructure this CRA, or you get to the point where, like the other 400 CRAs in California, they all ran into the same thing. They didn't fail or stop because they achieved their goals. They all got shut down because they weren't able to fund operating and general budget stuff. Okay, operating services, the basic services that are required in the city. And right now, the numbers have gone exponential in the CRA. And again, looking at the budget there yesterday or early this morning, it was, well, here we go. I can't remember the exact percentage, but there's a big, like a $2.3 million haircut that's being pulled right off of the ad valorem for the city of Stuart, and another $4.5 million that comes from the county. So you get about a 7.3, whatever the numbers were. I remember about $7.3 million that's coming to fund the CRA. Well, we're going to be underfunded by close to $4 million. Well, okay, would we really be underfunded if we didn't have the CRA right now? And the CRA did accomplish its initial goal, and you can see where the CRA over the years has been used for fluff projects. So I'm getting into details and the weeds with you, but
No, it's a good question. Why was it renewed? Because it has rejuvenated basically Colorado Street area there, so it was renewed. You bring up a good point. growth continues to dominate conversations in Stuart. Do you believe the city is growing responsibly?
Well, they had the zip 4 years ago when Chris Collins won the seat and I was unsuccessful against Eula Clark. And Eula at the time said that, well, we have to approve projects because it's by right. And then within 7 months, after that election, she approved a project that was, and Campbell Ridge did as well, that wasn't by right. And they rezoned what is now Sailfish K on Central Parkway. Now, they didn't have to do that. Okay. And we were going to need those commercial properties at some point. And we even had a resident speak out at one of those commission meetings saying just that. He's like, one day we're going to need them. And so they got knocked out. But those were the only 60 units that have been built in the last 4 years. So it's got a lot of the local developers kind of, I would say, running on fumes. I'm sure they're doing okay, but they're not doing as well as they probably would like to do. But now they're also being squeezed by the big Wall Street interests that are going to benefit from these Live Local Act and such. So, to go back to your point, yeah, I think we've done okay. I think some of the problems that I see would be like that Hilton True Hotel on Colorado. I think that doesn't really fit. But we haven't seen a whole lot of growth. And boy, people, when you knock on doors, you probably have talked to a lot of people, Casey. They do not want to see any more apartments. And I hear that from 95, probably, now maybe 90 out of 100 people. And they don't want to see apartments, and they're kind of happy. And if anything, they've become a little bit complacent. And they don't realize that, if certain candidates get back in a position, you're going to have three potential pro-growth guys. Even though I know Campbell Ridge ran as a slow growth guy 4 years ago, I find it very curious. He says now anybody that says they're slow growth is either misinformed or they're trying to deceive you, as if growth's not an issue. Well, yeah, we're built out, 96% built out, but you can build up because that's what cities do. Once they get built out, they start building up. And that Local Act.
I was going to say build up or tear down and rebuild, right?
Right, exactly.
So speaking of growth, residents do hear those terms: smart growth, pro-growth, slow growth, no growth. Let's just use two: the smart growth, slow growth. What do those terms actually mean to you?
Smart growth is trying to, what are we trying to accomplish here? And this is where I'm more of a free market guy. And boy, I got into a really good conversation with a young couple with, I think, 3 or 4 kids. And she kind of lit me up a bit, right? I'm like, well, I got to explain my answers a little bit better here, right? But at the end of the day, we ended up talking for probably half an hour, and we were both laughing by the end. But for a while, there was pretty heated because I'm thinking, yeah, he thinks I'm venturing into the world of socialism or too much government control. And I'm a little bit concerned about that. But ultimately, you're trying to protect, as everybody says, the goose that lays the golden egg. Downtown Stuart and this small town feel is what makes this area so valuable and why so many people who currently live here want to stay here. That's why they're all against those apartments. So that's smart growth. Okay. And when you see, as opposed to slow growth is where you really aren't building a whole lot. I think there was a need for a hotel, for example. I years ago did a study on that. I'm like, yeah, there's when a place like Best Western, which is not nice enough hotel, but they're getting $300 a room during the springtime. Yeah, they could use some competition. And I knew one was coming. But is it smart to build it right next to the main entrance to downtown Stuart, if you will? And the architecture, does that fit the area? Not so much. So that's kind of not smart growth, but we don't necessarily want no growth and too slow a growth. But I would like to see any growth we do, our local developers be involved with. And I know there's some really good local developers here. This is a question that people that came up at that forum, and I heard later people are like, "Did you hear what he just said?" The question was, would you take any campaign contributions from developers? I think I was the only person that said yes, because I can think of 2 developers that I know personally that I know who've lived here for a long time, and they do not want to see Stuart built out. So I would probably take contributions from those 2 fellas. I probably wouldn't from anybody else. But those 2 guys, I know they're not going to go, off the rails. They don't want to see that happen. And then because of this zoning in progress, where everything kind of got slowed down to the point where they're getting squeezed, they got families and people to take care of too. All right. So how you're going to take food off their table for a long amount of time. Well, they're being pinched like people in my neighborhood, right? People that say I'm turning my back on my neighbors. Well, I don't want to turn my back on my neighbors. I don't want to turn my back on these guys that I know are really good people and have throughout the years, and we're talking 30, 40 years, have helped Stuart in many, many ways. So I'm not going to turn my back on those people.
I'm glad you brought up that point, Will, because that term developers has been, thrown around very loosely, and just all of a sudden developers a bad word. And that's not so. We support our local developers, and there's things they develop we love and need if it fits the community. So developers are not all bad. I think it's when you get these bigger firms out of the area that come in, build for a buck and leave that people are more opposed to on that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Now, is there a recent development project the commission approved that you would have voted against, and why?
Well, I think the Hilton True would be, we've already talked about that. I would have voted against that. I would have, there hasn't been a whole lot of projects that I can think of that I would have voted against. You have to go way back to Sailfish K. I would have voted against that one. But those are two, I guess. There may be another one or two. Trying to think. There's a couple that came through the CRB, but I didn't see any problems with them. So don't have anything for you.
Okay. Do you believe neighborhoods should have a stronger voice before redevelopment projects are approved?
I think they have a pretty good voice right now, especially when it comes to East Stewart. I think the city almost goes out of their way to try to bring things forward. But then what's interesting is sometimes the people aren't being listened to. Like there's a really good video that I saw of, I think his fellow was named Mr. Brinkley. Anyway, he was spot on. He totally nailed it. It was about a year or 2 months before a recent city commission meeting where he was talking about how they're going to narrow the road along Martin Luther King Boulevard, and it's going to ultimately lead to gentrification. I won't repeat everything he said. And guess what happened here about a month ago at one of the city commission meetings? They're going to narrow the road, and I've been hearing rumors from people, some local individuals over there, that they know, this place is going to get built out, and they're anticipating affordable housing units being built on a large scale in that area. And then once that begins to happen, then gentrification can come in and things of that nature. So I'm thinking, what are we doing here again? With smart growth, are we going to just steamroll our residents, especially when they come out to these meetings? So I think, to go back to your question, answer simply, yes. I think they do a good job of trying to communicate with the residents. It just may not always hear what they're saying.
Albert Brinkley is definitely who you're speaking of. I've actually had him on this show previously because he is very concerned about the gentrification with Stuart and how certain, zoning and regulations were passed he didn't feel the residents had enough input. And, he lives there. So those are the voices I like to listen to the most, are the ones that are impacted and live there, not somebody on the outside that says, this is what you need. The people that live there, they know. So, but I do know who you're talking about.
Okay.
Florida has limited local control through the laws. We talked about this a little earlier, but I'm going to let you delve into it a little more. But they have limited local control through laws like Live Local Act and SB 180. Should Stuart challenge those laws more aggressively or work with them?
I think we should see where this lawsuit goes. But you want to, at this stage of the game, you have to challenge them aggressively. Don't go along to get along, because the forces that are coming, they don't give two hoots about you or the residents here. For them, they have this bigger narrative, this bigger agenda, and you've heard of it probably, 15-minute cities and walkability, sustainability. This is all about packing as many people in as tightly as possible, removing cars, geofencing. It sounds all crazy. Some of this stuff, I remember 4 years ago, it was like, this sounds totally insane, right? But boom, 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 boom. Everything starts to happen and fall into place. I'm like, I've seen this before. When these things start to go, when the dots start to connect and they tell you what they're going to do, you might want to listen, because these people have enormous power. So we have to push back. Otherwise, then find a new place to live. Go. For me, I'm going out to the middle of nowhere. If this fails, if I fail with this pursuit here, and what I foresee potentially happen, then there's a place down the road for me to head. So, I don't want to see that happen.
What area of Stuart concerns you the most when it comes to future redevelopment?
Well, right now you have the bullseye around Sailfish Park, around that proposed train station. So yeah, and that's going to expand in any direction, but probably right down the MLK corridor, if you will, in that general area. So that's an area that's of a concern. And then other areas of concern is where I currently live. It's literally just on the border of the CRA. Those areas outside the CRA, we talk about affordable housing, we talk about affordability, yet people want to raise taxes. Well, if you raise the taxes, then especially in the commercial, like the mom and pop landlords, right? When I had a little property here in my community as a rental property, I went up 16%, I think 11%, excuse me, and then 13% property tax year over year. And they say now you can only raise 10% per year. But okay, I had an option. Either I can eat those costs or I could pass it on to the people. Well, there's only so much you can raise the price, and the people won't, you can't sustain it, or you can't get it. And then you run risks that I didn't want to take. So I became in a way, a forced seller. You sell when you can, not when you have to. That's a major risk for a lot of the local landlords right now in the areas outside the CRA, because if taxes have to keep going up to cover those operating expenses of the city, even though it's minor, people say, oh, your ad valorem only went up $24 or whatever, over the course of a year. That's $2 a month. Well, okay. But it's a bunch of other little details that get blended in. And then you toss in if the development starts to come back, then that causes the tax appraiser to have an excuse to raise property values. And then, okay, well, now your base tax outside of ad valorem, other things all start to go up. And then next thing you know, you got problems. And then people are unable, they have to leave. And where are they going to go? I mean, I live in a place that's one of the more affordable places in Stuart. And I just, it was tough to talk to these people, and you knew they were in a pickle, and there's no place they wanted to work here. Where are you going to go? So, side note would be, we really should consider auxiliary dwelling units, ADUs. That's something that people don't necessarily want to talk about too much, but if we were to do that, we could create some affordable housing, legit affordable housing. We could get it to where mom and pops own these and just add it on the loft above the garage, or maybe a mother-in-law suite. And then you can make those tax exempt, because another thing with those laws, if they build affordable housing on those ball fields, the way the laws are written, they're tax exempt for 30 years. So you get no revenue off of them, right? If they're affordable housing. And those laws say they don't even have to be occupied. So these big Wall Street firms can come in there, build them out, and use them for whatever, offset gains in other areas or whatever. And they can play their balance sheet games all day long. And we get no benefit from it? Well, come on. If we're going to do the tax exemptions, let's try to pass it on to our local people. Anyway.
You brought up the Sailfish Ball Fields quite a bit, and I just think it's maybe fair to bring up that there was a proposal to put on the ballot this fall to let the city of Stuart residents vote on whether or not those ball fields get sold, much in the same as the waterfront property in the city of Stuart. Right now, the residents get to vote on anything that's leased or sold if it's waterfront and owned by the city. So they were going to try and do the same type of thing for the Sailfish Ball Fields. And there had 2 readings for that, and then it would be voted on if it was going to be put on the ballot. It made it to the first reading, and then it died because your opponent, Campbell Rich and Ms. Eula Clark, had voted no. Mayor Sean Reed and Laura Giobbe voted yes, and this is when the commission only had 4. So that died.
Yeah.
I just kind of want you to weigh in on your thoughts on that.
Well, what I found very curious about that was Campbell Rich, my opponent, Campbell Rich, identified, I think he said it as, this is quite the hammer you're going to bring down. I mean, he recognized that referendum would be potentially quite powerful. And then he said something that it was a key tell. All right, this is a key tell that he has motive to try to develop Sailfish Ball Field. He says, well, no one wants to encumber 10th Street, meaning Guy Davis Park, with Sailfish Park. Why would you say that unless you're trying to keep them isolated, right? So, sorry, you just ratted yourself out there in my book. So that's when he said that, I'm like, oh, I know I'm doing the right thing by running for Stuart City Commission. Because when he said that, I'm like, yeah. And then that's when I got to the zoning map. I looked up on the zoning map and I said, look at that. It's an urban general. He can get away with that. So I guess to go back to one of your earlier questions, one of the first things I would do if they don't do it before I get there, is to rezone. It takes just three commissioners to rezone that property. I would rezone it to public. And then it's much harder because if it's rezoned as public, those laws, they don't apply as easily as they do to when it's urban general. Right now, the way it's set up, those ball fields are gone. I think he knows that. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And I'm always one that I want to hear the people's voices, whether you're a developer, whoever you are. I want to hear your voices on these subjects. So I was just surprised it wasn't even allowed to go to the second reading because there was some issues that were brought up that were good points on both sides. And it was like, let's get some answers and some more discussion on this, which is what the second reading would have done, but wasn't even allowed to go that far. So very, very interesting perspectives. And I appreciate you weighing in on that. And moving on, a lot of local issues aren't billion-dollar projects. They're things like whether residents should be allowed to keep backyard chickens. Where do you draw the line between protecting neighborhood character and telling people what they can do on their own property?
Well, again, being a free market kind of a guy or the old traditional American, where you have freedom, that's one thing. But to keep the character of a neighborhood, you don't necessarily. I like the fact that the people who want to have backyard chickens recognize that they're very willing to cooperate. They don't want to have free-ranging chickens. They would be in chicken coops and chicken runs, and they're willing to be, from one of the people I've talked to have a setback because it's not fair to have a chicken coop or a chicken run immediately against the fence of a neighbor who may not want chickens, may not want to be bothered by chickens or whatever. So. This means not every yard can fit backyard chicken. So I think there can be a structure, like a scorecard is what I built out a little scorecard. I'm like, this, you can do this very simple, a 10-step scorecard that could be inspected within 15 minutes very easily. Either they have it or they don't. And you just check down the list. Are they set back from the neighbors a certain distance? Do they have their waste properly contained? Do they have their food properly contained so you don't worry about rats getting into it and things of that nature? And on and on. And if they fail that scorecard, no soup for you. In this case, no chickens for you, right? You get that permit revoked. And I've heard people say, well, we shouldn't even have to have a permit. Well, I get that, but there's got to be some way to basically fund an inspector to go out to make sure. And I think if you have an inspector going out there and checking, then and the inspector could be, and when I would say it makes it sound like, oh, you got a professional here. It could be somebody who's retired, and it's literally an $18 to $20 an hour job. I did the numbers based on that. It could be a retired person who just is looking for some extra income. And depending on how many chickens you had, if you have 500 chickens, okay, that'd be, X numbers of units to inspect. And, you can make a nice little side gig out of it, right? Everybody has side gigs these days because they're trying to keep up with inflation, right? So
right.
Here's a job that would be, you don't even have to have a regular Stuart City employee. You could outsource it, 1099 it or whatever, okay? Independent contractor, and easy peasy. And you just give them the list and boom.
Giving a lot of thought to this.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I tend to overthink things sometimes. So, no, I've got the spreadsheets and all this. I'm like, I know the numbers, can pop them out pretty quick. So, yeah, it can be done.
Very good. Will, at this stage of the campaign, voters are comparing not just your positions, but also your willingness to engage. You chose to appear at a public forum and answer unscripted questions from residents, while your opponent did not. Why do you believe showing up matters, and why should that influence a voter's decision?
Well, there's two things. Well, number one, you get yourself out there to people who may not even know who you are. As I'm walking around the door or the neighborhood knocking on doors, I didn't know you were running, right? When you get those forums like that, it's great. Everybody gets a chance to hear where you stand and things of that nature. You get a whole bunch of people, and then the reach is far greater than when you're knocking on one door at a time. And people, I love the forums because they had an opportunity where people who were in attendance could write down the question. Some people did, and some of their questions were asked. And so everybody had a chance to answer those questions. And you didn't know where they're coming from, but it's great because everybody has some input. And that's why it was kind of fun to see. I think probably, I don't remember how many people we had there exactly, but it was a pretty good crowd at both the forums. The one on 10th Street, we had the first one, and then the second one, the We Care Forum, there at Flagler. So it was a pretty well attended. And when the people if you don't show up to these things, then it just creates, well, why weren't you there? And I get it. There was, the CPAC, the Chamber of Commerce had an event for their 3 candidates they endorsed earlier that day. And it seemed like, you get into these little ticky-tack things. And ultimately, are you not all supposed to be on the same team? Or this is the city of Stuart. And this is where, I see some of this division, that doesn't need to be there. And this is actually, I think in our previous interview, I talked about Judge Clarence Thomas's speech to the University of Texas now about 2 or 3 months ago. And he said that, he said, we've gotten kind of, the civility has gone down, whereas we used to be able to both talk, whether you're one, left or right, whatever. But ultimately the goal was to try to do the right thing for everybody. Well, now we've this division, and I understand why and who's driving that narrative, but we got to remember that ultimately KC and I and everybody else, Campbell, my opponent Campbell Rich, we all live in the same city. We want to see the best for the city. We just may have different views of what makes it the best here.
That's what I enjoy most, is hearing the different views. So I'm disappointed when candidates don't show up, because I think it disenfranchises some of the voters that will vote for them. I love hearing the different views, and that's how we maybe come up with the best, greatest ideas. You combine some views or something. So that's a special part about campaign season for me. But you mentioned CPAC and Chamber. I have a question for you. In another race in Stuart, the CPAC Chamber endorsed their candidate before, who ends up being the opponent, even entered the race. They endorsed before the race is closed. So they endorsed somebody else came in, didn't even get a chance for an endorsement. Did they interview you at all?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so they did do a fair. I'm just curious if you had the opportunity of an interview, if that one was pre-decided as well. I just was curious. Moving on, another big topic here in Stuart, the proposed Brightline station continues to divide the community. Do you support moving forward with the project as it exists today?
Well, it's kind of in the county's hand right now. And if the federal grants don't come through, then who knows what will happen. And if the federal grants don't come through, would I be willing to support using taxpayer funds from the city of Stuart for that? Nowhere. I wouldn't want to do it for the entire amount. And and it's split here, because I hear a lot of people. Well, some people say, I wouldn't spend $3 on that station. Then I have other people, we should fund the whole thing. Do you realize what that is? That's if we did the $30 million, which would have became $45 million, which would became 80 something. But at $30 million, that's $3,800 per household on average at the time for City of Stuart. And that's a pretty big, bill to throw down on people, especially since a lot of those people may not even take the train. But I get it. There's a potential argument to be made for having a train station there. But would I support funding it entirely with the City of Stuart? Taxpayer funds? Absolutely not. And especially since I know who's behind it, like Fortress Capital, they have a history of reneging on deals. They backed out of a deal with the city of Vancouver, which is a classic, tipped off that they were going to do the same thing to Stuart. And that's exactly what they did. And then who was their parent company? Fortress Investment, based in New York, right? Okay, so we have the Wall Street firms here, right? And then previously they were owned by a SoftBank. I don't think they are anymore, but a big Japanese bank. So do I really want to bend over to the Wall Street types? No, they already got way too much power with the Senate bill, so they have already passed.
No, and Fortress is primarily owned by, I think it's Mubadala Investments out of the United Arab Emirates now. So that's ultimately the owner here of Brightline. But what is the biggest transportation problem facing Stuart today?
Traffic. People talk about the Brightline station, and okay, let's say we had a station right where they want it, right there behind the courthouse. Okay, all the people in Port St. Lucie and Fort Pierce that might want to ride the Brightline, they got to come across basically one bridge, the Roosevelt Bridge, and it's already kind of a nightmare during certain times of the day. If you add in the hotel traffic that's going to be coming in whenever that gets built, maybe call it 2 years from now, it could be a snarl. That's the classic traffic snarl, right? So I think that's part of it as far as transportation issues go. And then, of course, people talk about the railroad bridge is 100 years old. That's kind of a minor thing, but it would be nice to have a higher bridge. I say it's not really a minor thing. It's kind of a major thing, actually, because if you have that high bridge, then you don't have all the boat traffic being jammed up. And that's another transportation issue. All these people who want to use their boats, take it out to the ocean, or just pedal around outside of someplace besides, the St. Lucie River. Well, they can't do that right now. I mean, it's like I was out there on a boat the other day, and a guy was like, "Yeah, it takes sometimes a half an hour to get to underneath that bridge." So yeah, it's kind of a major thing. So those are my transportation things. the snarl, and then the bridge.
Good points. And that brings up, just so folks know, that railroad bridge is actually owned by Grupo Mexico. The Florida East Coast Railway was bought by Grupo Mexico. So it amazes me how all these foreign companies own these infrastructures, and they want American taxpayers to upgrade and repair the infrastructure they purchased. Grupo Mexico owner is one of the richest men in the world. And, here we are. We're probably, the American taxpayer will foot the bill to upgrade his company.
Yep. Yep.
What is one city expenditure you believe deserves a second look?
The CRA.
There you
I
go.
already talked about that a bit,
Yep.
but oh shoot, I just was looking at the budget, and there was another one. I didn't write it down here, but it was minor, relatively speaking. So CRA.
Would you support an independent performance or financial audit of any city department or major project?
Typically, we've had independent auditors come in. So, yeah, you want to have it. Yes, I would support it. You want to have independent auditors. And, I've seen enough publicly traded companies. They got blown up in one, several years ago. They had an independent auditor that didn't do their job. So there's no guarantee that independent auditor is going to do their job. But at least it gives you another layer of protection, risk reduction. So,
Are Stuart taxpayers receiving good value for the taxes they already pay?
I think so. In some respect, there are certain things that are still kind of nebulous behind clouds when I'm looking at the budget, and I've reached out to the finance people, and they're like, well, you really should talk to the city manager on that first. And everybody's still kind of getting their feet wet to a certain extent. So I like how they did do some drastic cuts last year in the budget. There's a lot of line items that got reduced significantly, and I thought that was a good start. I think I was looking at it, I'm like, you can't cut much more in a couple of these line items. Some maybe, obviously the two big boys in the house are the police and fire. They're about 54% of the budget, 52 to 54% of the budget. But then you get into the other little category. But there's not a whole. Those are both union. The police and fire are both union, and they're scheduled to go up about 7.5% next year. So they're about 1.2 million, I think is what it was. Their increase. So and to be fair, they're going up at 7.5. They were kind of understaffed for a year, right? And that's been kind of rectified too. Even though they did a lot of those cuts last year, those cuts enabled these extra firefighters to get hired. So yeah, there's a good bang for the buck currently for the commission. There's still questions I have about that.
Okay. So Stuart proudly calls itself the sailfish capital of the world. What's one action the city should take to better protect the river?
I don't know if it's even possible, but I was thinking about that. People talk about the fertilizer and stuff. I think we maybe mentioned this before. There was at one point a state law that said, if you have a backyard, you can only use 5 pounds of fertilizer in your backyard. I'm thinking, well, who's monitoring that? But at the same time, the Joe homeowner can only spend 5 pounds of fertilizer. I know golf courses here is putting over 600,000 pounds, right? So is there a way to basically monitor when these people are putting on the fertilizer and try to do a study of how much of that is running off and into the river? That's one way to maybe help kind of establish a baseline. And who knows? Maybe there's not as much effect from these fertilizers as people currently suspect. I don't know. This is why you do study. And again, I hate to be the guy who says, let's do another study and spend, whatever it is, $200,000 on a study. I wouldn't want to spend $200,000 on this study. We currently have an environmental attorney, and they're amongst all the things they do. Ruth Holmes might be able to jump in and try to set up a little schedule or a way to track down some of that information. So just a thought.
Okay. Homelessness remains a concern for many residents. What role should the city of Stuart play in addressing it?
Well, this is going to sound tough, but typically, the city of Stuart, let me back up. Typically, when government funds something, you get more of it, right? So if you're going to fund a homeless shelter or something like that, you typically get more of it. And I think back to when government was small, right? Go back to my old free market and small government. mindset. Back in, that wasn't that long ago, back in when I was in the 70s or 80s, which might be way back in the last century for these young whippersnappers out there today. But the people relied on the churches. The churches had a much bigger, and obviously the churches have been, the population of churchgoers has been radically reduced, but they had this massive influence, and they could provide all kinds of things. Used to have the Salvation Army, even Goodwill where I grew up, and the YMCA. They would do, these were totally unrelated to government agencies. And they didn't rely a lot on government funding. So that's a slippery slope. So I would try to encourage as many nonprofits and people who, especially if we cut taxes, then people would have more, in theory, more revenue to use to maybe donate to these other causes. The people with means would have the ability to donate to these projects. And that's kind of how I see it.
Okay. Do residents have enough opportunity to influence major decisions before they're made?
Not always. I think a lot of people knocking on doors, people had no idea that 4-story Hilton True was coming in there. And that's on them to a certain extent. You kind of have to pay attention, but they didn't, they were outraged. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's being built there. Right. And so, obviously it works well for me because my opponent voted for that. So, but still, it's little things like that.
It's one thing City Hall could do immediately to improve public trust.
I'm growling here. Maybe, I would say get along better, but you can't always get along. Sometimes you have to be willing to say no and recognize things. Because right now, a lot of people are kind of like, what's going on here? We see all this bickering up there on the diet, but that's what you want elected officials to do. You want to have them hammer out, sometimes not physically hammer out, but hammer out the details on something as best they can. And it's not always civil to do that. And you can do it in certain more diplomatic ways, that's for sure. But I think that would help regain public trust. Because I have heard people say, well, it's like a circus up there. Well, okay.
Would you support something like the county has? They have the email portal where the county administrator, which is very similar to the city manager, and then the commissioners, their emails are all public that come in through their email addresses that the public can search at any time. Would you support something like that? I know there's times probably the county growls that people do see those emails and then issues do arise from them. However, it's very transparent, and hats off to the county for doing that. So would you support the city having that kind of system? I know it's been talked about, but nobody seems to be able to get it pushed across that finish line.
Yeah. Okay. Call me a skeptic. You could say, oh yeah, let's do that. But then if there's somebody that's really involved with something nefarious, they'll find ways around that. But no, I think that would just enable another layer of transparency. And I have no problem with that. I don't of course, that's just me. I don't have any nefarious ideas planned, but so I don't have any intentions of skirting around anything like that. But if the cost wasn't cost prohibitive, then why?
The next questions reflect topics voters have repeatedly discussed on social media during this campaign. Your campaign has emphasized returning Stuart to what many call Old Stuart. What does that look like in practical terms, not just as a slogan?
Returning it to Old Stuart? I don't know if we can ever go back to Old Stuart. And what does that look like? I think that ship has sailed. I think what best thing we could do, I don't know if they mean by Old Stuart what the zoning was before it was changed, I think in 2020 to allow 60 units per acre. Oh yeah, we can go, you can toss that into the dustbin of, well, tried that, done that, didn't work out. So people got angry about that one. But yeah, just keep as charming as possible. And what does charming mean? Well, kind of like we have it, 3 stories or less, not overcrowded. Let's not pack everybody into sardine cans. And then let's not try to emphasize sustainability through walkability and nobody owns cars and new urbanism stuff. No, that's Old Stuart's kind of like what we have to a certain extent. Let's not go into the direction of a new urban.
So some supporters describe you as an anti-growth candidate, while others say you're simply asking for better planning. Which description is more accurate?
Better planning? That's a tough one. But, to be fair, probably better plan. Realistically, I told the realtor group that. I said, you got 1.5 million people. We could. This is like little Hong Kong here. And they're like, oh, you know how many people live in Palm Beach County? Oh, it's 1.5 million people. Well, okay, we'll never become 1.5 million people. But the fact of the matter is we have 1.5 million people that want to move here. And can we stop them? Or people are going to be able to buy a lot. And by right, they have ability to build on those lots. It's, those lots are getting, fewer and far between and getting more and more expensive because they're fewer and far between. It's just the way the nature of that beast works. You're not creating more land, really, unless we start, building sandbars out there or something. But so, yeah, I kind of answered your question.
Critics argue that opposing multifamily housing can drive housing cost even higher. How do you respond to that?
Okay, there's 20. I have on one of these computer screens here that I did a study. I went through over 2,500 apartments were built, and none of them were affordable. And I hear that, I got engaged with a commenter on one of my Facebook post, and they thought, well, if you build it, it will reduce prices. No, that's not how it works. This is not an economic econ 101 type of situation. And there's people who firmly believe all we have to do is build more apartments, and then prices will go down. No, that's no guarantee, and that's not how it works. In fact, we saw that happen. So what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different result. So should we just continue to build out more 4-story apartments, which is going to, infuriate and demoralize the current population? And they're all going to be coming in, like the Sailfish case. One of the commenters made the great comment. He's like, you're going to lose. You don't have affordable housing coming in here because they were all going to be priced at a high price, and they're being marketed like a luxury townhouse. And you're going to lose jobs. So no, you can't. No, we can't just keep building. And another thing about that I want to point out real quick. So I did the study. The most affordable unit that was built, and a lot of these are built by billionaire companies and managed by billion-dollar companies from outside the area, California, South Carolina, all over the place. The most affordable housing was done by a local developer. See, and this is why we got to protect our local developers. And I saw that was like one of the last projects I came across, so I gave the fellow a call. I won't mention his name. Took the time to call me back, answer the question, and these are a local developer, and he was the most affordable housing, and it still wasn't really affordable for the just the way that particular structure was.
Now, there's been a lot of discussion online about whether Stuart's commission is listening to residents or to developers. Do you believe that criticism is fair?
Yeah, it's fair, because you got to wonder, why are you approving some of these projects when you don't have to? One of the local media sites, said my opponent came in as, like a Mr. No kind of a guy, only to learn that, there was codes and statutes you had to follow. Well, okay, there's codes and statutes he could have followed, but he chose not to. 7 months after election, and went ahead and approved a Sailfish case. He talks. My opponent talks about following the comp plan. Well, he totally ignored the comp plan with that. So, yeah, it's fair. Yes, it's fair for residents to question what the commissioner's motive.
If elected, what is one issue where you're willing to stand alone, even if it's unpopular with fellow commissioners?
The CR. I hate coming back to that, but I'm thinking, man, that it's going to be a problem at some point. So if the other people don't want to deal with it or here stand with me, that's okay. That's fine. But I'm going to try to point out exactly why I think it's going to be a problem. Just because it has 400 times out of 400 times before. In other places, and the numbers are going exponential, which means we're on the clock here, so we're going to have a problem.
Okay, lightning round about you. Answer in one sentence if that's possible. Your biggest strength?
Research. I dig around.
Biggest weakness?
A little too shy. I could more confrontational when I should be. I'm typically...
One commissioner you agree with most, and that's a commissioner from the last 4 years.
Nah, from the last 4 years, yeah. I get a kick out of Sean. Some of the stuff he says. I also, but honest, some of the things that Chris Collins did, aside from the way he handled the city manager fire, and he had reasons for that. I'm not trying to armchair quarterback that, but Chris Collins.
One city decision you'd reverse.
One city decision I might reverse. Approving it got reversed. I would say I wouldn't have voted for that $30 million package that they agreed to for Brightline. Oh, for sure, no way. And I'm thankful. And that's another reason why I like Chris Collins. He is the guy that called that out. He's like, look, they're backing out of the deal. My opponent was perfectly okay with going along. Now, it's because of that. That's one reason, and the way that Chris came in and shut down the development, that was causing so many people to ask problems or ask questions. What's going on? They had a problem with it. It's more than one answer or more than one sentence. So,
I gave you that leeway. That's fine. What is your favorite place in Stuart?
in Stuart, it's kind of the river, I guess. I used to go fishing a lot of these little snook holes and stuff. So probably in Stuart, it's just a couple of good fishing spots. I'm not going to disclose.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Keep those honey holes. Best thing about living in Stuart.
The people, I've had so much good relationships with people here over the years, and you knock on doors in certain neighborhoods. I think of two or three in particular. Everybody there is warm and fuzzy, and there are neighborhoods that are kind of cold, but for whatever reason. But the people in general, there's so many smart people, really capable people, and that's not to say that everybody else isn't smart. Everybody is able to function at a high level and respect. It doesn't matter where you go in Stuart. I don't feel there's any area that I would feel unsafe walking the street. And I think that's a great thing. It's a testimony of all the people.
4 years ago, voters chose someone else. Why should they choose Will Laughlin over your opponent this time?
I don't want to raise taxes, number one. And I don't want to see the ball fields in Sailfish Park turn into affordable housing that we don't get any rent on, or I should say any tax revenue on for 30 years. So those would be the two.
Finally, if voters remember just one thing about your campaign after today, what do you hope it is?
Well, as a guy who didn't want to be a politician, willing to step up and do a job so they didn't have to. People are super busy. They're all trying to stay ahead of inflation. My current situation allows me to just go out and dive into it. And it's like, because I know if I fail at this, well, I'm probably going to sell, or, it's not going to be a place that I want to live anymore. So I'm, on death's ground, right? The Sun Tzu, put your men on death's ground. So I'm willing to step in there and do things so people don't have to. And whether or not they come to see this truth, that's on them. And if not, I'll shake the dust off my feet and move on.
How can people learn more about your campaign or get in touch with you?
There's a website, electlaughlin.com or Will for Stuart. Either one will get you to that website. And also, probably the better way would be to look me up on Facebook. That's where I do most of the active posts. Will Laughlin for Stuart City Commissioner Group 1 on Facebook.
Excellent. So, folks, again, August 18th is the primary. This actually concludes all of my City of Stuart interviews. All the candidates came on. As you can tell, these are very in-depth interviews. We have a lot of different conversations where the candidate can actually take the time to express their thoughts and views on various topics. You can find all these interviews on YouTube. All the candidates did join my show to interview, with the exception of Will's opponent, which is the incumbent Campbell Rich. But other than that, everybody else is on the YouTube interviews. So August 18th, folks, you really need to get out and vote that day. With the City of Stuart, the candidates do need to reach 50% of the vote, and then that's it. So in this campaign, or in Will's race here, there's only 2. So one should definitely hit that 50% mark. It is your time to decide who you want to represent you in the City of Stuart as well as the county. You do not need to change your party affiliation. So there's no reason not to vote. And one thing I have to say personally, I really like this year a lot. I know there's a lot of Facebook and negativity going on social media posts, but there's a lot of positivity as well. And folks, the interesting part, I've enjoyed all my interviews with all the candidates. There really is a diverse base of candidates out there that have differing views. And I think that's so important. That's what we're built on here in America. So please listen to these candidates. There really has to be somebody that best suits your views and interests. So make sure you vote August 18th. And finally, don't forget to follow the KC Ingram Show on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube for more conversations with people asking for your vote. I'm KC Ingram. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much, Will Laughlin. Good luck out there on the campaign trail and shaking all those hands.
All right. Thank you, Kate.
My pleasure.